You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
What a beautiful day for horses in the morning.
You are listening to the #1 horse podcast in the world. Here's your entertaining look at the horse world and the people in it.
I'm Sarah Honegger.
And I'm Christy Landwehr, and you are listening to this special monthly NRHA episode of Horses in the Morning on the Horse Radio Network for this Thursday, February 13th.
Good morning, Horse World.
It's the second Thursday of the month. That means it's time to slide in to the National Reining Horse Association episode of Horses in the Morning.
Sarah, I am so excited about today's show. We are going to dive into something a little bit different that is not just for the reining community, but for the entire horse community. I don't know about you, but I can certainly use some tips on financial planning. And for some, I know that they're really thinking about, how do we get professional riders over from different countries? How do we get barn help? How do we get students, who are maybe wanting to do something with their university? And so we're going to dive into the visa world as well.
Christy, it was so fun having you here with us in Oklahoma City last week. And what a way to celebrate by getting the newest look at the new OG&E Coliseum in Oklahoma City.
It was unbelievable. And I'll tell you, the first thing I noticed, even though those wonderful wooden seats will forever be remembered, but boy, the leather plush, larger ones will be nice.
Yes. There were so many cool innovations that we got to see. And you're exactly right. I mean, there's so many memories tied to those wooden seats in the Jim Norick. I know for Oklahomans, they've been watching state basketball tournaments and state wrestling and all of their favorite equestrian moments. And I know for our exhibitors, that is the NRHA fraternity and that is the Derby, and that Gateway of Champions is so special. And there's so many heartstrings that are pulled when we think about the Norick going away. But golly, is it going to be a beautiful new chapter in that new OG&E Coliseum.
It is. We took during the fraternity a picture of everyone that's ever ridden in that pen. And I was busy during that time, so I didn't get to go on the arena floor. So I took a picture of me just all by myself because years ago, I also got to show in the Jim Norick when I was a youth rider, and it meant the world to me. So I'm so excited about the new Coliseum. But yes, there are definitely memories of the old one as well.
Absolutely. And I just can't wait for everyone to see the new one. It just even months ago to now, you can really start to picture that event being in there. We'll have our Derby in there. I'm not sure if that's going to be the first event or one of the first events. We'll see, as their timeline proceeds, but there'll be some big changes, some exciting changes. I think our exhibitors are going to absolutely love it in there. It's so modern. There's so many VIP experiences available. There's not going to be a bad seat in the house. And it's just going to feel obviously brand new compared to our loving old Jim Norick Coliseum. But I just think it's going to be so state of the art that any little hiccups along the way or any sort of change, which I know can be really tough, it's just going to all be overran with how incredible the new facility will be.
I completely agree. I cannot wait. And the other reason that I was into Oklahoma City was we had this amazing leadership gathering, which was where we did our annual general membership meeting, and we had people come to kind of participate in that. And we had some guest speakers, and we're so excited today because two of them will be on the show. So if you weren't able to be with us in person, you get to hear a little bit from them now. So what did you think about the leadership gathering?
It was really cool. It was our very first time doing it this way. It replaced what we used to call our winter meeting, which was all committee meetings for NRHA. And we still have those, and we still meet virtually often. And those have already kicked off for 2025. But I think this was a really neat idea and a good way to get others that maybe aren't in a committee yet or don't know, the ins and outs of an association. It gave a lot more footholds of here, come join us, come see what this is about, and a lot more entry points, I think, to other leaders in the association who might not be willing to just jump into being on a committee.
I completely agree. So we're going to dive in with our first guest today, and we're going to find out a little bit more about tips on financial planning.
Luke Milholland grew up immersed in the world of horses as a son of a renowned horse trainer. Though he once envisioned a similar path for himself, he discovered a passion for finance. Now, as the CEO of Vault Wealth and a certified financial planner, he's dedicated to helping people connect with their money in a meaningful way, ensuring their finances will align with what they truly value. Good morning, Luke. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Luke, you are no stranger to the equine industry. For those listening, can you please tell us about your history and your connection with reining?
Sure, yeah. If you're familiar with reining, the last name Milholland might sound somewhat familiar. My dad, Doug Milholland, was in the NRHA Hall of Fame and futurity winner, Derby winner, multiple world championships, and just kind of grew up in the industry and honestly thought for the good part of my upbringing that I would follow in Dad's footsteps there.
So what did lead you to a career in financial planning, Luke, and wealth management? How did that transition occur?
Yeah, so I was probably a sophomore in high school when a client of my dad's gave me a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that was the first time that I had ever realized that, oh, wait, you mean there's another way to do this? I could do horses for fun, not as a living, and just found the whole idea of business and finance, real estate, investing very fascinating, and studied that in school and did internships in college in financial services, and I guess the rest is history, as they say.
That's awesome. And you got to join us at our first leadership gathering here in Oklahoma City. And you spoke to everyone about financial planning and some strategies when looking at how they're connecting, with their money and with their future and ensuring their finances align with everything they want to do. When should people begin their financial planning journey? I think I even was the one that asked you this at that meeting, but I just think it's a really important question.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ideally before they Google how to retire in 6 months on $47.52 in savings, right? So I always say that there's no time like the present. Ideally the best time is yesterday, and the next best time is today. So never too early and never too late as well. I'll just say, if you haven't done it, don't wait any longer. Get on it.
So what are some common mistakes that people make with their finances, and what are some tips of the trade that you would give them to not make those mistakes?
Yeah, you bet. So I think probably one of the most common mistakes that I see people make is just thinking that more money will fix their financial problems. In reality, it's kind of like saying, hey, get me a bigger horse. That'll make me a better rider. when really, if you don't know, what you're doing or have the right skills or habits, then all a bigger horse will do is make the fall harder, right? So I think that's a really, really common mistake that I think people make, is they ignore things like cash flow, or they live beyond their means, and then they wonder why they're always broke or behind. And so, much better to rely on a solid plan than to bank on, a lucky break.
Is there like a particular amount of money that people should save with each paycheck? What are some kind of hard and fast rules? Like, how much do we need to retire? How does all of that work? How much should we save every paycheck? What are some tips there?
Yeah, I think a good general rule of thumb is if a person can get to where they're socking away 15 to 20% of what they make, they'll be in good shape. And so, that might be a stretch for some, but again, going back to the previous question is, hey, just start wherever you can, whether that's at 1% or 2%. But I do find that thinking in percentages, while it can be trickier, a lot of times people want to think in just dollar amounts, right? But a percentage can be oftentimes more helpful. So, and that can work on both ends of it. So that if that's a savings rate of, like I said, 15, 20%, if you can do that, you're going to be in good shape, most likely. And then Conversely, in terms of, well, how much is enough, you can also think in percentages there as well. There's a rule in financial planning called the 4% rule, which would just suggest that, or 4% safe withdrawal rate, which would suggest that if you take 4% of whatever you have saved up in assets, then that gives you an idea of what you might be able to sustain without running too high of a risk of, running out of money. And so, again, rules of thumb are helpful in that they give a general guideline, but, it's always better to do more detailed analysis, but hopefully that gives you some idea there. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. That's definitely a great start. I'm over here taking notes. I don't know about everyone else listening, but I sure am. Luke, you mentioned that the best time to start was yesterday, but if not, today is a great day to start. I love that piece of advice. What is another kind of one of your go-to pieces of advice that you wish most people knew about starting their financial planning journey, or, I guess the whole strategy of it all, either one?
Yeah. I think I'd just say that money is a tool, not a trophy. And so what I mean by that is, oftentimes people get in their heads and sometimes have a poor relationship with money or the idea of wealth building because they think that maybe, money is evil or something like that, because it's not something that is often talked about in school or even in our homes growing up. And so I think just realizing that, hey, money isn't evil. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, but in and of itself, it's just an inanimate object, a tool. For the horse folks out there, you could also maybe describe it as it's kind of like manure, not just that in its green, but that if you let it, pile up and hoard it, it starts to stink. But if you are smart with it and spread it around, or maybe even concentrate it in the right areas, that it can really help things begin to flourish and grow. So, I think that's kind of maybe one of the main things I would hope that people would take away, is just recognizing it for what it is, just a tool. It's going to serve as a catalyst in helping you accomplish, what's important to you. Or if you have a poor relationship with it, it can really be a culprit as well. And
I love that. Luke, so how does somebody find a financial planner? We're going to ask you here in a second for all of your contact information, because certainly we would love for you to be able to share your knowledge with those that are listening. But how do you recommend they find a financial planner in general?
Yeah, so there's, anymore, you don't have to find somebody that is local to you or your area. There's certainly advantages to that, perhaps, but with today's technology, you can really try and find anybody across the country or the world that maybe is specialized in exactly either your business or the types of things you're trying to accomplish with your money. And so you don't just have to walk down the street and go in the first sign that you see that has the word financial in it. And so I think, really just trying to find one. A good relationship with a financial planner should be long-term and one that is in your best interest, right? So not somebody that's typically going to be selling products on a commission basis, but that is a true fiduciary that can come alongside and partner and help you get where you want to go, regardless of what choices you decide to make with your money in terms of where to invest. So I think that's the key. So Google is a great place to start, but I think you can search for things like fiduciary or advisory. And I always tell people to follow the money. If you can understand and feel good about how the person you're working with is compensated, then that'll tell you a lot about where any alignment might be or potential conflicts of interest might lie, and is a good head start.
Those are great ideas. So Luke, how do folks find you? What is a good website for you? Social media? How would you like them to find you?
Yes, well, I wish I was better at social media, but we are on there. You can find us. You can message us there, but the name of my firm is Vault Wealth. So on Facebook, it would be Vault Wealth Strategies. Our website, vaultwealth.us, and that's vault like a bank vault, VAULT. wealth.us.
Thank you so much, Luke, for coming on the show today. I think you gave some super valuable tips, and this is so great for those that weren't able to be with us in person to be able to share this far and wide.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
So, Sara, I so appreciated what Luke said. I think all of that is so good. And something that I was always taught, too, that I think is really interesting is there's actually good debt versus bad debt. And I know we didn't really dive into that with Luke, but I was taught that, credit card debt, evil, right? Because the percentages are so high. And then if you own a house, that's not bad debt. That's actually tax write-off and all kinds of things. So you don't necessarily have to pay that mortgage off right away. Because as you do get older, you probably need some tax write-offs. So that tax debt is okay. And then the other one, car loans, get rid of those right away. So those are just some tips that I have been taught in the past. Do you have any extra things like that come to your mind?
I just always think to not live outside of our means. And I know, that kind of makes me laugh in the back of my head if my parents are listening. Maybe having a horse wasn't what I always needed to do, but for your soul, you need to.
Yes, exactly.
But, just balancing, like, would I rather go enter a race this weekend with my horse, or would I rather go to dinner, or can I do both? And looking at things like that and just finding the balance of it all and what is within our means and what is doable. And, I love his analogy of thinking that it's like horse manure, and like what you're saying, it's not all bad and it's not all scary. So I hope people find as much use out of all of that and what he had to say, like we did at our leadership gathering.
William Velie received his bachelor's degree from the University of California at Berkeley and graduated from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. He is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Will is a recipient of the American Bar Association Louis A. Brown Award Honorable Mention for Access to Legal Service. Will works with the National Horse Benevolent and Protective Association, the National Racetrack Chaplains Association, us at the NRHA, and professional bull riders on immigration policy matters. Welcome to the show, Will. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's very icy here in Oklahoma, but we're making it through.
Yes, and I'm in Colorado today, and we had 1 degree when I woke up. 1 degree. It was really fun feeding horses in 1 degree. That was great. So, well, we're going to dive right in. Please tell us your background and how you got involved with horse industry clients.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town called Little Axe, Oklahoma. And it's funny, my father was from New York. My mom and dad are both from New York, but they moved us out to Oklahoma in the late 60s and wanted us to grow up in the deep woods, which we did. We had 20 acres. We had our own horses. My dad would put me on the back after we bridle broke and blanket broke and saddle broke our horses. He would put me up on the horse. We had a big sandy pit in the front of our house, and he would put me on the horse when I was about 5-6 years old, and I would be the first one to ride the horse. And I just always had a love of horses. Had my own horses growing up. My grandfather was an old country doctor outside of Saratoga, New York. And he ran harness horses. So when we'd go visit him back east in the summer times, he would take us to all the tracks. And so I grew up running around the tracks as a kid. And so I've always grown up around it. I kind of left that behind when I went off to college and went to law school. And I started practicing immigration law right out of law school. I just loved it. It's an interesting, you meet good people. You try to help people navigate through a confusing system. To help businesses meet their needs and help people achieve their American dreams. And so I was doing that for about 10 years, doing a particular type of visa for laborers that come in temporarily during the year, during the busy seasons. And my friend had gone to high school with the president of the Oklahoma Horsemen Association, Benevolent Protective Association. And he didn't know how to do this particular type of visa. So I helped him. We were successful, and we started a company called Horseman Labor Solutions, and it spread quickly to where we were working with the Kentucky and the Florida and Louisiana and then to Maryland and New York. And so I started working with thoroughbreds about 15 years ago, I live about 20 miles north of a big quarter horse and reining horse area called Purcell, Oklahoma. And there's a couple of really well-established reining horse folks, one from Uruguay, one from Brazil, that have started really good breeding operations. One named Thiago Boucher and one named Gabriel Diano. And they came in, they needed some help with grooms and some athlete riders and also some breeding techs. And so there's different types of visas for different types of skill set requirements. And so I started working with them, and they are very well networked. And all of a sudden, we were speaking with reining horse folks from Arizona, from Texas, and it just spread. And so we've been doing it for about 15 years, and it's really enjoyable.
Well, that's so cool to hear about. We got a sneak peek of all this at the leadership gathering. So I love that we're getting a chance to dive a little more deep into this with our listeners today. You mentioned that there's different types of visas depending on what sector of the horse industry people are wanting to get in, whether that's a professional rider, maybe a student. We have a lot of folks that want to come and apprentice under an NRHA professional. So can you go into a little bit more detail about the different types of visas that might be utilized by these folks?
Sure, and I'll try to stay out of the weeds as best I can. But immigration, especially for temporary visas, it's an alphabet soup. The visas are actually associated with different letters. You've got A visas all the way through U visas now, and A visas for a diplomat, a B visas for your tourist that's going to go visit Disney World, C visas for an airline pilot. It goes all the way down to U. For different skill levels and different skill requirements, you have different types of visas. The visa we do the most of is broken into two different categories. There's one for agricultural workers, and there's one for laborers, and that's called an H2. The H visas require that you have a temporary need and that you try to find Americans first. You have to work with the state workforce agency and Department of Labor, and you have to do a labor clearance where you offer the job to Americans. We typically require no experience, 1 month experience, because you don't want somebody that doesn't know anything about horses. But we try to make the barriers to Americans as low as possible to show good faith that we're trying to find Americans. But in this economy and where we are now as a country, a lot of people are not more interested in working outside and waking up early and getting their hands dirty. And so there's a big shortage in all the agricultural industries. I know that, immigration is a big topic recently, and one of the things that's going on that's spooking the markets a little bit is that the agricultural labor backbone is mostly immigrant these days. And so the way that we operate is that we put a visa program in place. And so if a trainer needs 5 workers for their busy season, which is typically January through end of October, you get 10 months of the year. Then they'll go through this program, and they bring their workers every year. The workers go home for 2 months, November, December, and then they come back in January. For the breeding operations, they do agricultural visas. So we tie it to, you have to tie it to a season. You have to explain why you need the workers and why it's temporary. So we do the foaling season starts in January, weaning, breaking, and then ends with the sales season in October. And that works for whether it's reining or thoroughbred or quarter horse. We also do breeding techs. There's a lot of people that come up and help with the breeding programs. They also come up on the agricultural visa. If we're going to shows or doing, if you're doing long-term off the farm work, and we do this a lot with thoroughbreds, then you have to do a labor visa, which is called an H2B. And we tie that to typically the racing season. And, to trainers, whether they're quarter horse or thoroughbred, they'll bring their workers up. Let's say they're going, if they're quarter horse, they're going to do Lone Star in Remington or Prairie Meadows or Ruidoso, and they tie their need to their different seasons. And if they're going place to place, they can keep their guys here year round by filing the different locations. And so that's the main type of visa that most horsemen need, is that type of labor visa. Now, there's another type of visa for athletes. An athlete, their visa is called a P1, P for performer. And an athlete has to show that they've reached a level of international recognition, that, they have accolades, that they've been recognized by the press, they have high rankings, and athlete can come up for 5 years. And so that's a really good option. They can also bring 5 support staff. So, we'll have a reiner come from Italy or Germany or France or wherever, and they'll bring their team with them. And the team can be here for up to 5 years, which is nice. That's a very long-term visa versus the other types we do, which are fairly short-term. We always keep in the back of the mind that you can help people become permanent during that time. It takes about 3 years to get your permanent residence. You have to go through the same process where you show no Americans are available. But in this reality or economic reality, there just aren't people that are available. So it's a pretty straightforward process. You mentioned students and people that want to come understudy. If you're just coming to compete, you can come on the tourist visa that I mentioned. If you're going to Disney, but there's also a provision in that's called a B1 visitor's visa. And so let's say an athlete's just coming to compete, not to work or not to train or anything like that. They'll just come on a 6-month visitor's visa, come and compete and go home. Similar to if somebody was coming to be in a golf tournament or a tennis tournament, they're just competing for prize money or prizes. Then that's very simple. You just go to the consulate and get your visa and come over. If you're going to be doing something that's more akin to work, there are internship trainee visas. There's a J1 visa. You can also, which is for training, but you can also come on the agricultural visa if you're coming to work, and you can train while you're doing that. So, there's different options for different people. If you're a scientist, there's a professional level visa, which requires a degree, and you can get a longer term visa for 3 years. And then if you're what's called an extraordinary ability business person, athlete, scientist, let's say you won the $1 million challenge, or you have made a great breakthrough in artificial insemination or whatever it is. If you can show you've risen to the very highest level of your field, then you can get what's called their extraordinary ability visa, which is the best visa to get because it walks you directly into an expedited permanent residence, which takes about a year after you get the extraordinary ability recognition. So it's immigration. It's like solving a puzzle. A person comes into the set of circumstances, and then you figure out what is the best option, given what their circumstances are, for them to give them the longest, most durable visa process, which can give them the longest time to be here and give them the most flexibility to do what they want. And so that's what we do.
I love that. And I actually think, Will, you explained that really well, considering there's an A through U. And I did not know there was an A through U. That's a lot. What's going to happen when they go past Z?
I guess they'll have to start doubling up on letters, or maybe they'll do A-1. Who knows?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's a lot. So I have the next question then, I guess, is with these visas that you just mentioned and explained so well, what is the current process of receiving one, like the time involved, the cost? How does all that work?
Sure. And different visas have different timelines and numerical limitations. So the fastest and most direct one is the agricultural visa. The agriculture is considered a national security interest. And just to kind of demonstrate how important that agricultural visa is, during the COVID shutdown, all consulates in the United States consulates in the world shut down, and we're not issuing visas because the borders were closed, except agricultural visas, anything related to the food chain. The consulate stayed open, and we were able to bring people even in the darkest times of COVID because we needed the food chain to continue. And the workers did have to show that they had their vaccination back home to be able to get the visa. But besides that, our doors stayed open. We actually got busier during COVID because so many Americans dropped out of the workforce that there were a lot of agricultural enterprises that were just struggling to keep up. And so the agricultural visa, it's the only visa that doesn't have a numerical limitation. Not the only one, but the only one that's in common use. And so that one, there's 500,000 a year, more or less, that are issued for people to come in and do all the different types of agriculture, whether it's picking vegetables or taking care of animals. And so that one has also the quickest timeline. It's a 60-day timeline. If somebody calls me November 1st, I can have their people here on January 1st. So that's the agricultural visa. The other visas are tricky because the labor visa, there's only 65,000 per year allowed. They have a lottery January 1st, and you can file 90 days prior because the actual visas become available April 1st. And so every January 1st, our office is full, and we're here on December 31st, getting ready to press the button so we can get everything filed as soon as we're Central Time. So at 11 p.m. we file, we enter the lottery because it's first come, first serve. And if you get picked, great. If you don't, there's things you can do. There's certain countries that are identified as helping us try to stem what they call irregular migration through the Central American areas. And because they are cooperating with us, they have their own special allocation of visas. So Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Ecuador, Costa Rica, they all have their own special visa. And so if you don't get picked in that first lottery, you can tap into those countries. And up until recently, USAID was actually leading that, where they would go recruit workers for the companies. And that actually, I was talking to the person that was running the El Salvador program yesterday, and their program went from 70 workers 2 weeks ago to 7 workers as of now because of all the freezes, which is, I'm not trying to insert politics into it, but he's just trying to figure out what happened to his program that he's been building for the last 5 years. So that one, we have to have more planning. The ones for athletes, they also don't have a numerical limitation, and you can get it done as quickly as you can get it done. But those you have to put together, whenever you have to prove something, especially to a disinterested bureaucrat that may or may not, like what you're doing. Sometimes you do get officers that don't like issuing visas. You have to prove that your person is internationally recognized. And anytime you have a subjective criteria to prove something, the officer has their discretion to say, well, I don't really think you've proven it. And so you have to be very careful. You have to go get expert letters. You have to, usually Samantha Oldfield at National Reining Horse writes us the best letters as the expert association person. And so we have to prove our case. And so those usually take us a couple of months to put together, 30 to 60 days. And then once we submit them, immigration will approve them 2 or 3 months afterwards. So there's some forward planning for those types of visas. The costs are different. The agricultural visa is the least expensive, and they expedite those. For the other types of visas, you have to pay them an additional fee to expedite things, and that can get really expensive. An athlete visas, to file one expedite is going to be about $4,000 to the government. That's just, that's what it costs. And they know that there's no competition because they control the visa. So they don't have to, they tell us the cost and we either can participate or not. And so timelines and costs just vary according to what type of visa you're doing.
Well, Will, you mentioned, some common mistakes already in describing those that employers or employees make when trying to secure these visas. But what would you say across the board is the most common, and what is the easiest way to avoid making this mistake if someone listening today is about to go and apply for one of these visas?
Sure. So when you come to the United States, you have to satisfy the consular officer that you have no intention to stay permanently. And so whenever you go, you have to have a clear explanation of what you're doing. I'm going to compete in the futurity. And you have to show them an exit strategy. Like if they say, so what's your plan? You go, well, here's my round trip ticket. I'm leaving on this date. I have my own operation in Argentina. And so I'm going to be returning at the end of my stay. And then they want to know that you're not going to come up here and work if you don't have specific work authorization. So, you're going to say, I have savings, and you bring your bank account. So that's getting in. The biggest mistake I see is when people get here, they overstay either inadvertently or purposely. And the problem with immigration status, I always say it's like juggling glass balls. If you drop one, you can't put it back together. And so if your visa expires, there's no way to fix it in the United States other than people that marry Americans. The American citizen has what's called a fundamental right, as established by the Supreme Court, to have their spouse with them, even if their spouse committed technical immigration violations like overstaying their visa or working without permission. But besides that, if you come in without a visa or you overstay your visa, you're stuck in limbo, and you can't fix your status except for a few very narrow exceptions. And so the reason we see so many people here that don't have status is that there's no way for them to fix their status. I talk to trainers and, people from all over, business people, that they tell me the same story. And it's a heartbreaking story because I know it's true. They say, this is the hardest worker I've ever met. They're good Christian folks. Their kids go to school with my kids. They've never done anything wrong. They just came here to have a better life with their family. How can we fix this? And a lot of times I just have to tell them, look, there's no way to fix this. If you don't have either a U.S. citizen parent or a U.S. citizen spouse, then you can't fix your out of status issue. And so that's the biggest, I don't know if it's a mistake, but that's the biggest hurdle that we face with immigration. I would say there's two types of immigration. You have proactive immigration, where you're going to put a visa program in place. The people come here legally. They go home, they come back every year, and then you put them on a pathway to permanent residence. And that's proactive and straightforward. What we see a lot of, and we go to tracks all over the country, we walk the barns, we tell the workers during training, hey, we're going to have a free immigration clinic at 11 when training's over. And we'll be at the chapel. Come see us, and we'll be glad to talk to you and figure out if there's anything we can do. And that type of immigration is what I call reactive immigration. So they're already here. How do you fix the problem? And there are ways to fix the problem, but there's not that many ways. So if we meet 200 people in an afternoon, maybe 30 will have a pathway, which is still great. But, the other ones, we typically, we don't tell people to stay here without legal authorization, but we'll tell them, if you're going to stay, make sure don't drink and drive, don't fight with your spouse, and pray for the amnesty. And there was an amnesty. It was back in 2001. Bill Clinton said, if you don't have a criminal background and you pay a fine and get in line with everybody else, and you have a job offer or a family member, then we'll let you become legal. George W. Bush had the same plan put together, but then 9/11 happened. And since that time, there's just been no movement in terms of people being here. And so the population has just grown and grown. I'd say there's probably, they estimate, about 10 or 11 million people here without status. And it's frustrating. 2 years ago, we came 6 votes in the Senate away from passing what was called a blue card at the time, which said if you worked in agriculture for the last 2 years and you agreed to work in agriculture for the next 8 years, then you and your family can become legal immediately. And we'll put you on an 8-year pathway to, at the end of 8 years, if you stay in agriculture, then you'll get permanent residence. And that was going to, bring a lot of people out of the shadows. You have to get a full criminal background check. You have to agree to pay your taxes. And so it would have brought people out of the, shadow economy and into having a normal, regular life, and also contributing to a very important sector of our economy that is understaffed right now. So we came 6 votes short. The filibuster, we had 54 votes. The filibuster killed it. So I don't see anything in the near future like that happening. But sometimes when there's a push in one direction, it comes around and there's something that balances out on the other side. So maybe all of the enforcement talk right now will then lead to people saying, okay, that's fine. We've gotten the folks out that have criminal issues. Now let's let the people that are here just contributing to the economy, not causing problems, come out of the shadows and become, have a permanent stake in our economy, our country.
So, Will, how do our listeners find you if they want to know more? What is your website, social media? What's the best way?
Sure. So we have a website called horsemanlabor.com. I know we do social media. We've got some really good young folks in our office that are really good at that kind of stuff. I'm not, but I know that they contribute to Instagram and the other handles, and I can find out what those are. But to be honest with you, I'm just not the social media guru. But our website, and we have horsemanlabor.com, and we have velie.us, which is velie.us, and both of those are websites. We pride ourselves for being accessible to everybody. We don't charge for phone calls. We don't charge for consultations. We encourage phone calls. We like to talk to the workers as well as the companies, because the workers have a lot of questions and they have a lot of concerns. And so we are very accessible. We have about 20 people that work here. Probably half of them are Spanish language speakers. So we can talk to pretty much anybody who calls.
Will, thanks so much for being on today. This was super helpful, and I think you did explain, a very difficult topic well. So we really do appreciate you being on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
That was so much fun to have Will on the podcast and really deep dive into something that does affect so many people in our industry, and also in a way that, it's so complicated, but I do feel like he breaks it down in such a simpler way, which I know is really, really helpful. And the folks that attended our leadership gathering gave that same feedback. So it was so fun to get a little more in depth with it today.
It was. I completely agree. It is a topic that is a little bit challenging sometimes because, like he said, it's alphabet soup. And I learned something. I had no idea there were visas A all the way through U. That's fascinating to me.
It really is. It really is. Every year we take the youth officers of NRHA and we go with the American Quarter Horse Youth Association officers, and we all go to DC together and talk to different lawmakers about issues that affect the equine industry. And these worker visas for ag industry folks is always on the docket for us, and always something that we go in and educate lawmakers about and talk to them about. And I know our youth experts or our youth officers, I should say, are more of an expert even than I am, but they might not have even known that it goes all the way to you.
And I love that we do that for our youth. I think that's so important. I did a Washington, D.C. trip when I was in 7th grade, and I was probably a little bit too young to really understand what I was seeing. And then, over the years now being a part of groups that go to D.C. and seeing it in a different light, it is really good. So I'm really glad that we give that opportunity to our youth. I think that's wonderful.
It really is. It's one of my favorite things we do. I know our folks today are going to want to know more about what we do at NRHA and with our youth, and maybe even listen to past versions of this podcast. So, Christy, where can they go to learn about all that?
They can find that on our podcast. They just have to go to nrha.com/podcast. And please do come check out our website. We will tell you where all the upcoming reining shows are near you, so you can go and watch them and be a fan. We also have a link to an education page to find out more about reining, and a link to finding a pro near you to go ride a reiner yourself. So now go out and have the slide of your life.